Kuf Chaf Hey 125 Amud Beis 125b. We're really starting in the middle of something over here because we left off in the middle of something. So the way to find this is if you have a regular Gemara and there's a Tosfos that says Hakol Maidim on the right side of the page. So directly across from that, maybe one line down, it says Amar Rav Yosef. I guess it's about 15 lines from the top of the page, towards the end of the line. Amar Rav Yosef. So we have a machlekes between two Amirayim based on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the question is based on the Mishnah. The machlekes is based on Mishnah later on that says that you're allowed to move a barrel that has a stone on it and tilt it so that the stone falls off. And there's a machlekes Amirayim. If we're talking about that you forgot the stone on it, or if you placed the stone on it, what's that talking about? Rabbi says in the name of Rabbi and the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he says that it's talking about that you forgot the stone on it. That's why you're allowed to move the barrel. But if you would have placed the stone on it, this is its position for Shabbos, then it would have been usher to move the barrel, because the barrel would have been a basis l'davar aser. The stone is something that's muktzah, and you can't move the barrel. So how are you allowed to move it? The Mishnah says you can move. Well, you didn't put it on there on purpose. You just forgot the stone on there. You wanted to move it somewhere else. You got busy. That's the opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi Asi, said over by Rabbi Yosef in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no. If you forgot it there, he says it's talking about when you forgot it there as well. That's when you have to move it like that. That's when you have to lift the barrel up and tilt it. But if you would have placed the stone on top, then that placing it down on top would have been considered like making a cover to the barrel. And you wouldn't have to lift up the barrel to knock the stone off, to tilt it to get the stone off. You could have taken the stone off directly. It would have been a regular lid if you would have placed it there. That's what Rabbi is saying, is that I can make something that's muktzah, not muktzah, by simply placing it down. Rabbi is saying that no, that this item was muktzah. And you can't make it not muktzah with just placing it down. You have to do something to it, you have to change it, you have to do something. So what we learned yesterday was that Rabbi, which is quoting Rabbi, that says that things remain muktzah. He says, why in our Mishnah do we say that if you have a gourd with a rock in it, that if you tied it if it stays inside, so then you're allowed to use it? 1 second, what did you do to it? You just put a rock in it, you just tied it down. See, it became a utensil by just putting it in it and tightening it. So he said, well, over there I tightened it. I had to tie it in and all of that. So that's like as if I made a change in it, and that's why over there it becomes a utensil. However, by the barrel, just putting it down is doing nothing. And it's not going to become a utensil by putting a rock on top of a barrel. It's not going to become a cover. We're holding now with Rabbi Yosef. Now, Rabbi Yosef is quoting Rabbi, and he holds that things become a utensil very easy. You just place it down and it becomes a utensil. So Amar Rav Yosef and Musfina Nashmaitin. Rabbi Yosef says that we can use our Mishnah to ask on the statement that I said over in the name of Rabasi, that when do you have to lift up a barrel and tilt it? That's only if I forgot the stone on the barrel. But if I would have placed the stone on the barrel, then the stone would have been considered the cover of the barrel, and I could have just taken it off directly. If that's the case, what about our Mishnah? The The Mishnah says that I have a gourd with a stone in it, that I'm using it as a bucket. That if it's not tied down, I can't use it, it's muktzah. Why? I put the stone in it. According to Rabbi, that should be enough. The fact that you put the stone in it makes it into a vessel. Gemara says, it's not so. Because you didn't tie the stone in, bitule batla. It doesn't become a vessel. It's nullified. Nullified as a vessel, not nullified to the gourd.
Rabbi Smith, didn't we already have a discussion about a stone that's used as a doorstop, and just on that basis, it became mutar? And that was just on basis of intent, as I recall. I don't recall an objection to that position.
Right. I think there was an objection. I think we said that some said that you had to make a change in it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't remember directly, but I remember remember bringing up this point that I had these stones that I used as like paperweights, and apparently, even though I designated them these nice pretty rocks that we use on sukkah, in the sukkah, so the tablecloth shouldn't blow off. Remember, so I was told that no, that's not enough just because you designated it. You have to do something to it. So anyway, here I'm using the stone as a, by my case, I don't know if that's considered a keli. Here I'm using it as a lid, or I'm attaching it to a keli. So Rabbi Yosef says over here, because it's not tied on and it's going to fall out, so that's different. So normally you can make it into a keli very easily. You just put it on top of the barrel. But over there it's going to fall out, so it doesn't become part of the keli. So therefore, over there, there's a problem with the stone that's not tied. But over here, if you would have placed the stone directly on top of the barrel, you would be allowed to remove it. Now the Gemara says, what's the machlekes Rabbi and Rabasi? These are two students of Rabbi Yochanan. Mar Savar Binan Meiser. Rabbi holds that you have to do an action to make it into a keli. Mar Savar Le Binan Meiser. And Rabasi says that you don't need to do an action to make it into a keli. You just put it on top of the barrel, and on Shabbos, I'm allowed to just take the stone off directly. And they follow their reason, their lishitase. When Rav Dimi came to Bavel, Rav Dimi was one of the travelers. He would bring stories and halachas from Eretz Yisrael. So he said in the name of Rav Chanina, who's an early Amira, and some say that Reb Zera said in the name of Rav Chanina. I didn't know that Reb Zera came back to Bavel. I wasn't sure. I don't think he did. So it must be that he said it over in Eretz Yisrael. It said, Parmachatz halach Rebbe l'makom echad. Rebbe, which is referring to Rabbi Danasi, that Rabbi Chanina was a student of. He said that Rebbe went to a place, he found a row of stones. It was on Friday afternoon. He said, go and calculate so that we can sit on it tomorrow. I guess it means count them to see if we'll be able to use this area that have these stones for tomorrow's shir. You know, each student, I guess, would sit on one stone, see if there's enough. And Rebbe didn't require them to do any action. That's Rabbi Chanina's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan said, that no, Rebbe required an action. Something needed to be done to the stones so that you should be allowed to use them the next day. Mayamalu. According to Rabbi Yochanan, what did Rebbe tell them to do? Rabbi Amiyamar, Tzu'u v'lamdum amalahu. He said, go and arrange them. Lamdum over here means to arrange. He said, go and arrange them. Why did they need to arrange them? Because he held that tomorrow you won't be allowed to move them. So set them up in the right positions today because there's no other action that we're going to be able to do to the stone. So move them now. Rabasi Amertzu v'shifshifam amalo. Rabasi said, he told them just to brush them off. And even though there was no real action there, just brushing it off, but nevertheless, the next day they're allowed to go and move it. So the machlekes Rabbi and Rabasi is if you can make it into a keli by very little activity. According to Rabasi, they just had to brush it off. And he calls that a maisa koldahu, a very slight action. And nevertheless, the next day they were allowed to move it to be able to sit on. That goes back to our case. We are with the barrel, that if you placed it on the barrel on purpose, the rock on the barrel on purpose, according to Rabasi, you're allowed to take it off directly. According to Rabbi, you have to lift up the barrel and tilt it. Itmar. Rabbi Yesi ben Shala Amar, Savar shel Keresava. It was a stack of beams. Okay, well, that's the story with Rabbi. Rabbi Yechon ben Shala Amar, Geshay shel Sfina Hava. He said, Rabbi Yechon ben Shala says that it was a sounding pole. Apparently, the boats have this instrument. The sailors have this. They use this instrument to see how deep the water is, and so that they can take their boat in that area. Otherwise, we'll get stuck. Doesn't sound good. So they use this pole that they're used to see how deep the water is. So, Manda Amar Geshoish Kol Shein Savar. The one that said that we're going to sit on the Geshoish, even though the Geshoish seems to be something that was designated for a specific use. That's another type of muktzah. It's designated for a specific use and you don't use it for anything else. But if Rebbe was ready to use that for sitting on, so kol shkein savar, for sure if it's a long beam, a stack of beams. Mandamer savar, however, according to the opinion that said that Rebbe was letting them use the savar, the beams, he would not agree with the other one. Geshoish kaperalei. He would have been strict about the geshoish, which is the sounding pole. He would have said that is too delicate to play with, to use for any other use. And he would say that you can't use on Shabbos to sit on. Okay. The next point of the Mishnah was a vine that was attached to a jug. If you're allowed to use that vine to put the jug into the bar, into the pit, or to take water out of a spring. So we said if it's tied to it, then it's fine. So Zumayra Shikshura, the vine, which is now being used as a string, if it's tied to this pitcher, then it's fine to use on Shabbos. Kshurein, like Shuralai. It said if it's tied. Tied, yes. Not tied, no. Lema Masnitzin, like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, there's another possibility here. It could be that the stick, the vine, has a little loop in it that can hold the pitcher, even though it's not actually tied. And we're saying that that's not acceptable. So notice if there's a hook on the vine, that's not good enough. That's what we see from the Mishnah. So we see that's a problem because it doesn't fit with Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, Chariyos shel dekel. Chariyos are palm branches, but they've hardened. Usually the palm branches are soft, but when they get older and they get more firm, so then they become hard. Shegadron le'etzim. They were put aside for firewood. Okay. But then he decided that no, I'm not going to use them for firewood. I'm going to use them to sit on. It's going to become a chair. So tzarech liksha, you have to tie them up on Erev Shabbos. You have to tie them so that it's clear that these became a chair and they're not loose pieces of firewood. Then it's acceptable. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, you don't have to tie them. See? It can become a vessel even without tying. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel would hold also by the vine attached to the pitcher that you don't need to tie it. Rav Sheshes says it's an interesting comparison. However, I feel it Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. You could say it's really Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. And here, what are we dealing with? It's attached to the origin of the vine. Now, why does that make it worse? I'm not sure why that makes it worse. But it's not what we were talking about. Well, I guess what makes it worse is that because it's still, what I'm using here is a vine that's sticking out of the trunk of the vine. It's a branch that's coming out. It's attached to a bucket. And if it's tied to the bucket, then it will be considered part of the keli. But if it's not tied, then it's too significant to become bottled to the keli. It's because it's attached, it's not going to become just into something else because it's still attached. The Gemara is going to ask in a second, then 1 second, you can't use things that are attached to the ground. But right here, we're just discussing the bittul to the keli. Does it become part of the keli without tying it? So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says normally yes, but this case no, because it's still attached to the trunk. Yihachi, the Gemara asks, you're using a branch that's attached to the ground. You're not allowed to do that. You can't make use of trees and branches and bushes and all of that. The Gemara answers Lamatami Gimel. Okay, this is an interesting answer. It has to do with if you're allowed to sit on low tree stumps and all of that. It said that it was talking about the roots of a tree that are below 3 tvachim, if they come up above the ground, but they're still below 3 tvachim to the ground, those you're allowed to sit on, they're considered part of the ground. So here we're talking about a branch that's attached to the ground below 3 tvachim, so it's really not considered part of the tree, it's considered part of the ground. Considered part of the ground, for some reason that's more lenient. I'm assuming that the pit is very close to it and it's not going up and going down, it's going straight across and down into the pit. And then you're using that to get the bucket. So this halacha is based on that you're allowed to use the lower part of the tree within 3 tvachim of the ground. You are allowed to make use of it. I guess over there we don't have a concern that you're going to pull something off the tree. Maybe that's the heter. Rav Ashi says afilu tema betlusha. Rav Ashi says no. Really, it could be Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and nevertheless, it's not attached to the ground. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says it needs to be tied. He says, yeah, gzer shem yiktim. Says over here, there's a different story. Over here, the branch may be clipped. If you don't tie it, maybe you'll adjust the branch on Shabbos. But if it's tied, then you're not going to adjust it anymore. By the charayas, which were these hard palm branches, we didn't have any concern that you're going to clip them in any way. So therefore, even if it's not tied, it's considered a keli, it's considered a chair. However, over here, we have a gezerah, that's a separate story. Our issue is not turning it into a keli. Regarding turning it into a keli, it's fine. It's already a keli, even without tying it. That's Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. The whole issue is a gzeira that you might end up clipping it, making it smaller on Shabbos. So we say tie it. If it's tied, then we don't have that concern. Okay. That was fitting our Mishnah with Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Pekakach alain. This is the shutter. The Mishnah said that there's a machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim regarding a shutter. Are you allowed to use a shutter to close up a window on Shabbos? Rabbi Eliezer says only if it's tied and hanging. And the Chachamim say whether this or that you can use it. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Bar B'Chanan Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Bar B'Chanan says, name of Rabbi Yechanan, it's a common pair. Hakol Maidim, everyone agrees, She'ein Eisen Eil Arai B'Tchila B'Yom Tov, Ein Tzarech Leim B'Shabbos. Everyone agrees that this is a big discussion about making an Eil Arai. And there's a complication here as well in the Rishonim. A temporary tent. This is an umbrella issue and other things. The kids have this issue. Sometimes they play a house, they like hang up like a sheet over a table and they hide under it or something. So you're allowed to open a table on Shabbos, a folding table, because you don't use the under the table, you use the top of the table. It would be a problem to open it up if you used under it. There's a problem with strollers where there's a thing that goes over, like a canopy that goes over the stroller. It's officially supposed to be open one tefach before Shabbos to be able to stretch it out. Just like the sukkah, there needs to be one tefach open to put the shlak over the sukkah. Here we're discussing, everyone agrees you can't make an Eil Arai on Yom Tov, and you can't make an Eil Arai on Shabbos, of course. Question is if you're allowed to extend it. The way most Mefarshim learn this Gemara, and the way they want to learn Rashi, how Rashi learns this Gemara, this is a question what Rashi, the wording of Rashi, is that Rashi's talking about that this window pane, this shutter rather, is not in the wall, it's in the roof. And we're discussing here that most of the roof is there, or there is a section of the roof that's there. And you're adding this shutter, it's really a skylight. You're adding the shutter on. So Rabbi Eliezer says you're not allowed to add to an oil. And the Chacham say you're allowed to add to an oil. That's how they want to learn Rashi. You're allowed to add to the oil. Once it's started already, you're allowed to continue and you're allowed to put the shutter in. I think Taisus doesn't learn like that. There's a Gemara in Eruvin that they're quoting to say that if it would be a wall, everyone would agree that it's not a problem. Because if it would be a wall, why? Because what happened was Shmuel and Rav were sitting in a courtyard and the fence fell down. Now there's a problem over there of carrying. Shmuel said that you can take your cloak and just throw it over the breach in the wall and it will cover it over. Rav didn't like this, he turns around. So the Gemara says, the Gemara in the end said that Shmuel held that it was no problem. Rav wasn't going to say anything because it was Shmuel's area. But really Rav held that you weren't allowed to do that. Basically to extend the wall on Shabbos to make a mechitza, a vertical mechitza. Well, and the reason why he turned around was because he didn't want anyone to think that Rav changed his mind. Based on that, we can't be talking about a vertical wall because that would have been permissible. We must be talking about a roof. Okay. The Chachamim say that whether this or that, you're allowed to put up the shutter. Okay, I had a difficult time with this Gemara this morning. It was one of the more complex, just to figure out what the issue is. But in short, what's going on here is that Rabbi Eliezer has two statements. And the sages say whether this or that. The problem is it's really four statements, and whether this or that is a little bit vague. What Rabbi Eliezer said is that you're allowed to use the shutter, give two conditions. If it's tied and it's hanging. Now tied just means that there's a rope that's going from the opening to the shutter, and I can put it in. Hanging means that it's not touching the ground. So you have two conditions there. If you're missing one of those conditions, then you're not allowed to use that shutter because that's considered building on Shabbos. Well, the Chachamim say that, no, whether this or that, you're allowed to use it. Now the question is, did they agree to one of those conditions? Or are they saying you don't need any of those conditions? For example, to spell it out, do they say that whether it's not hanging and it's not on the ground, you're still allowed to use it? Or do they mean whether this or that whether it's attached or whether it's not attached, you're allowed to use it, but no one says if it's on the ground, you're allowed to use it. There's different ways of reading benkach or benkach, whether this or that. It's ambiguous. They're not saying exactly what conditions they're rejecting. So the Gemara says, "My benkach or benkach." What is the benkach or benkach? Whether this or that. That means whether it's attached or whether it's not attached, you're allowed to put the shutter into the window. Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Kana. Rabba, in the name of Rav Kana, says, Rabba, there's going to be a conversation here, so you have to remember Rabba said it over. We're on top of Kuf Chafav. Ben kasher, ben sheina kasher. Whether it's tied or whether it's not tied, you're allowed to put it into the window. Now, if it's not tied, that means it's definitely on the floor. That means the sages are very, very lenient. You can take a shutter off the floor and put it into the window. It's sort of like construction on Shabbos, but they said v'hu shemesuken, as long as it's been designated before for that purpose. It's not a problem. Shemesuken. Sukkon probably means in the mind. It's been designated. You decided that. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabba, "V'lei mamar ben tali ben she'ena tali v'hu shekasher." Maybe what they mean is not even if it's not attached. Maybe they mean that it needs to be attached. But it doesn't matter if it's on the ground. Whether it's hanging or whether it's not hanging, you're allowed to use it, as long as it's attached. Attached means by a rope. There's the rope that's going from the window to the shutter would allow it to be used. But no one would say that if it's not attached, just sitting by the wall, that you're allowed to put it in. That's Rabbi Yirmiyah's question to Rabba. How do you know that the Chachamim are being lenient, that you can take something that's not attached to the wall and put it in? Okay. So, and he says, the Amar Rabba bar Bachanam Rabbi Yechanan, k'machleikis kan, kach machleikis benagar. He has a complicated question. But Rabba bar Bachanam says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that the machleikis by the shutter is the same machleikis regarding a certain type of lock that was used to lock a door. That what they would do is they would put like a peg in the ground or on the ground, and it would go to the door, it would lock it. I think like they called it a police lock or something. It had like a little hole in the ground, and it would put it and it would push against the door. So that peg could be hanging on the door, or it could be not hanging on the door. So the machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about using a window pane on Shabbos is the same machlekes about using a peg to lock a door. Now, we don't know exactly what the machlekes is about the window pane, but maybe we'll have some idea if we compare it to the peg on the door to see, and then we'll go back to the window pane, to the shutter, to see if we can clarify what the Chachamim's leniency is. Titanan, Menagar Nigra means that's being dragged, the peg that's being dragged. Titanan was taught in the Mishnah. Nagar Nigra, just to help you out in following this Gemara, the first opinion the Gemara later on is going to say is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, which that's the strict opinion, which holds that it needs to, that a window pane, a shutter needs to be hanging, tied and hanging. The next opinion, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, would be the opinion of the Rabbanan, who's the more lenient one. So what we're looking at is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in the anonymous opinion here, and we're looking at Rabbi Yehuda's opinion as the Rabbanan's opinion. So so it says Nagar and Nigra, this lock that's being dragged, this peg that's being dragged. Noilam by B'mikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, you're allowed to use a lock like that. And the reason is because in the Beis Hamikdash, they don't have the same decrees, rabbinic decrees that they have everywhere else. The Kayanim were more careful, and we didn't make the same decrees. Avalei b'Medina, but you're not allowed to use it in the rest of the country. V'hamunach, but if it's a peg that's not even being dragged, that means it's not attached to the door. Kan v'kan aser. It's aser in the Beis Hamikdash as well as in the Medina, in the rest of the country. Rabbi Yehuda, this is the opinion of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda Imer, hamunach, even if it's not attached, b'mikdash, that you're allowed to use in the Beis Hamikdash. V'nigrar, and if it's being dragged, b'Medina, you're allowed to use it in the rest of the country. He's going to end up saying that he wants to say that the Rabbanan hold. Even the Rabbanan means it needs to be tied to the door. That's what he wants. This is Rabbi Yirmiyah questioning Rabba's explanation of the Rabbanan about the window shutter. Vitanya, and it was taught in a brisa. Ezo nagar nigra shneilam by b'mikdash avalei b'medina. What is the peg that you're allowed to use as a lock that's being dragged that you're allowed to use in the Beis Hamikdash but not in the country? Kol shekasher v'tali v'reisha migiel haaretz. Which opinion is this? This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the first opinion. He says that it needs to be tied and it's hanging on the ground, but you're only allowed to use it in the Beis Hamikdash. But anywhere else, the fact that it's touching the ground tells me that I'm not allowed to use it. Rabbi Yehuda Ze'af Medina Mutter says that being dragged, but it's tied, you're allowed to use in the rest of the country as well. Which type of locking you're not allowed to use in the rest of the country? Anything that's not attached. That you take it out and you just put it in the corner. That's when it's aser. Aha. The Rabbanan hold it's aser to use this peg if it's not attached. Va'amar Rabbi Yeshua bar Abba Mishmei Deula, Man Tana Nagar Nigra Rabbi Lazari. Who's the author of Rabbi Lazar Nigra means what I've been, the way I've been learning it. I quoted that Gemara, this Gemara at the beginning, that the stam, the Tanakama is Rabbi Eliezer, which means that Rabbi Yehuda is the Rabbanan. This being the case, the Rabbanan hold that you're not allowed to use a peg that's detached from the door and just put into a corner. You're not allowed to take that and use it because that's considered construction as a lock for a door. So too, I'm not allowed to take a shutter and put it into the window if it's not attached to the window. That is Rabbi Yirmiyah's question to Rabbi. Amalei, so Rabbi responds back, I follow a different opinion. I have another source. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. There's some sort of reed that's used to open or lock a door. If it's hanging and tied and hanging, the Pesach on the door, then you can use it. Ain't kosher v'tali. But if it's not tied and hanging, ain't Pesach v'nayel, then you can't use it. So far, he doesn't have a source. The source is coming up. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Aimer. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, Mesukan af b'sheina kosher. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that if it's been prepared, even if it's not tied, you're allowed to use it. That goes back to the top line of this page of Gemara. Ben kosher, ben sheina kosher, v'usha mesukan. Says, where did I get this opinion from? Because I'm joining together the Chachamim with the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that say that a shutter does not need to be attached, it just needs to be designated. Okay. That was the difficult part. You followed, we're done with the, you can relax. Amar Rav Yehuda bar Shelas, Amar Rabasi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rav Yehuda bar Shelas says the name of Ravasi and the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Halacha Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that says that if it's designated, it's enough. Gemara asks, Miyam Rabbi Yechanan hachi, and did Rabbi Yechanan really say that? V'hatanan, but we have a Mishnah. Kol kisei yakelim. This Mishnah is coming up on the next page. We turn the page. It's quoting what the Mishnah that's going to be coming up in about 10 lines. Kol kisei yakelim sheislam beis achiz hanitalim b'Shabbos. Any cover of a utensil that has a handle is allowed to be moved on Shabbos. That's only if it's considered a keli. In other words, this cover needs to be more than just a cover. It needs to also be able to function as something else as well. I could use it as a tray for a child to eat. Now, we spoke about before about the doors of a chest and that, all of those things that we didn't say they need to be a keli, but the explanation is those you were able to sit on. Rashi points this out, that they really had secondary functions that would allow them to be, that would make them considered not muktzah. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yechanan says. Now I have a reed that, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, I'm using it as a door, as a lock. What type of keli is it? The lock, the fact that you're using it as a lock, that's considered binyan. That's a construction. It needs to have a secondary function of some movable usage, not just that it gets put in to lock a door. Otherwise, it would be muktzah. So how could Rabbi Yechanan paskin like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that says that you're allowed to use a lock that's not attached to the door? You just take it out and you put it in. Rabbi Yechanan holds that that's muktzah unless it has a secondary usage. Maybe there is a teres keli. This reed that you're using as a lock really is also a keli. Why? Because we had this type of reed. You use it to turn over olives. And we said that on the end of it, you're able to see if there's oil there, to see if the olive was ready. Maybe that's what Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was referring to. The type of reed that also is a keli. And when Rabbi Yechanan paskins like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, he's paskening that like the way Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is referring to, where the reed is a keli. Maybe we have to make all this up to fit with, so Rabbi Yechanan should fit. The Gemara says, 1 second. Mi by Reb Shimon ben Gamliel teres keli alav. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel really requires this. He doesn't require it to be a teres keli. V'atanya, we have a brisa, charayas shel dekel shegadol shein eitzim. We had this before. This is the hardened branches, the hardened palm branches, that you set them aside for firewood. Nimlach leim liyeshiva, and then you decided that you're going to sit on it. Tzarech lekash, you have to tie them. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in Tzarech lekash, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says you don't have to tie them it's perfectly fine, even though it has no other usage other than just being a chair. It's still considered that it's not muktzah. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel does not require a teres keli. Back to the question, how does Rabbi Yochanan say it needs to be a keli, and he still passes like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan tzvir lekavasei b'chada palagla b'chada. Yeah, you're right. He agrees with one point of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, but not with every point of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. He holds that it doesn't need to be attached. The lock doesn't need to be attached. But he still holds that it needs to have it needs to have a secondary usage. It has to be able to function as a keli as well. Okay. Darash Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha a Pischa Deresh Galusa. I don't know what was going on over there, but apparently Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha was giving a speech at the entrance to the house of the Reish Galusa. He said, Halacha Rabbi Eliezer. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, that the window pane, the window shutter needs to be hanging and attached and hanging. Masav Rav Amram. Rav Amram has a question from the end of the Masechta. Midivreim Lamando, this whole complication over there. But whatever the story is, from that discussion we learn that Shepaikikim, that you're allowed to put in a shutter. They used a type of jug, and umaididim, and the shutter wasn't attached. Maididim was that you were allowed to measure a mikvah. V'kaishin, and they were allowed to tie something that wasn't a kesher shel kayama on Shabbos. We have a story, and that story tells us that you're allowed to use a shutter, even though it's not attached. What are you telling me? That the halach like Rabbi Eliezer? We have a Gemara later that says from their words of the sages, we learn the following. Amalei Abaya. Abaya asks Rav Amram. Rav Amram was the one that was challenging the drasha of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, that the halach like Rabbi Eliezer. Abaya responds to Rav Amram. My daitach. What are you saying? What's your opinion? Mishum diktani stama. What are you asking? Because you have another Mishnah, so you're asking on this Mishnah? The other Mishnah, okay. Stama. Stama means that it's an anonymous Mishnah. That anonymous Mishnah tells me that that's the halacha. At least that's Rabbi Yochanan says often. Halachic Stam Mishnah. So that Mishnah Daf on Kufnan Zayin at the end of the Masechta that says that you're allowed to use a shutter, that's a stam. Well, Nagar and Niganami Stama. The case that we had over here with a lock, a peg that was being used as a lock, where we said that it needs to be attached to the door. Otherwise, if you take it off the door, then you can't use it. That the stam over there, that means the anonymous part, was Rabbi Eliezer. So you're telling me a stam from Daf Kufnan Zayin that tells me that I'm not allowed to, that tells me that I'm allowed to use a shutter, but I have a stam regarding the lock that says that I'm not allowed to use it. So you have a contradiction. So you can't bring a proof from that Mishnah to this one because they have equal strength. So the Gemara responds for Rabbi Amram, Afilu Hachi Ma'aser Rav. 1 second. Over there was a story that went along with it. Rabbi Amram has a good question. There was a story that happened that taught us that you're allowed to use a shutter. That's stronger than a Stam Mishnah. Ma'aser Rav, we have a real story that we can learn from. Okay. Now we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kisei akelim shishlam beis achiza nitalim b'Shabbos. A lid that has a handle. You're allowed to use those lids on Shabbos. I'm Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, when do I need a handle on a lid? That's only if the lid is covering a pit. Because otherwise it's considered construction. If it's a handle, then it's something that goes on and goes off. And when I put it on, I'm not doing construction because you see it as a handle. It's something that's removable and you take it on and off. It's like closing a door. it's not considered construction. Oh, you close the door, you built a house. No, it's something that gets opened and closed. So if the lid has a handle, if there's a handle on this lid that gets put over a pit, so then that's something that gets opened and closed, and that's not considered construction. But if you're just talking about the regular utensil, a regular vessel, let's say, a barrel or something, an oven, that's going to be a discussion. That you're allowed to move, even if there's no handle on it. In other words, how do you get it off? There's no handle. Well, you probably need something, you have to stick a knife under it or something to get it off or whatever. But nevertheless, because it's a utensil, it's not considered construction to put that type of lid on it. Amar Rav Yehuda, Bar Shilam, Rav Asiyam, Rabbi Yochanan, Vishi Yishteres Keli Aleim. That's what we quoted before. These lids that you're allowed to use need to be a vessel anyway. It means they have to have a secondary usage, which we said before meant maybe you could feed a child on this. Turn over the lid and you can put food in it. It could be used as a tray of some sort. Kulayalma, Kisi Karkois. Everyone holds a lid that goes over a pit. If it has a handle, then you can use it. Eily, but if it doesn't have a handle, you can't use it. But the covers of a vessel don't need to have a handle. Even if they just fit perfectly on and it's hard to get them off, still, you're allowed to use those. When is the argument? Bekalim dechavrina ba'ara. They're arguing about vessels that are attached to the ground. Mar Sever Gazrinan. One opinion holds that there's a gzeira. What's a keli that's attached to the ground? An oven. One opinion holds that there's a gzeira there. Mar Sever Le Gazrinan. The other opinion holds that there is no gzeira. Let me see how they put this here. Because the Tanakama holds that because it's attached to the ground, it's considered like it's the ground. The oven is considered like a pit, and therefore it needs to have a handle. And Umar Savar Rabbi Yossi holds like Gozrinan that we don't make the gzeira, which means that according to Rabbi Yossi, because it's not actually the ground, it doesn't need to have a handle. An oven door or an oven lid, the top of the oven, doesn't need to have a handle. You're still allowed to take it on and off on Shabbos. You're allowed to move it on Shabbos. Lishna Achrina, there's another version of this that says it's the same thing. It's just worded differently. It says, Ki pligi. When do they argue? Bekisi Taner. They're arguing with regarding the door to the oven, or the cover to the oven. Mar medamale lekisi karka. Tanakama compares it to the cover of the ground. Umar medamale lekisi keli. Another one compares it to the cover of a vessel. Okay, so the machlekes in this Mishnah, which we thought that the Tanakama held, we could have thought that the Tanakama held that all utensils need to have a handle, all lids of utensils need to have a handle. It comes out that when Rabbi Yossi says, B'meh devarim amurim, that only lids that cover something in the ground, that he's being lenient, but he's actually he's not arguing so much, because the Tanakama also holds that lids that cover the ground need to have a handle, and lids that cover vessels don't need to have a handle. Rabbi Yossi is only arguing regarding the oven, that he says that's not actually the ground, and the Tanakama holds an oven is a gzeira, similar to the ground. Okay. Let's leave it over here. Let's leave out the new parak. Next parak Mifanim is about moving storage boxes if you need the area for people to sit on Shabbos.